You know, I really like covering games from this era. Not to get all old man shaking his fist at the clouds with you guys and say that I hate modern gaming or anything, but there is something really special about that Xbox 360, PS3, and Wii era of gaming to me. Like, it's recent enough to still feel modern, but not too that some of the more questionable trends we see today are there either. Hell, just look back at some of the other games that I've covered on this channel, and you'll see that the majority of them are from this time period. And there's still so many games that I want to talk about from this time, like all the Elder Scrolls games, the Mass Effect trilogy, the Uncharted trilogy, just way too many to name. Today though, I get the chance to talk about what many consider to be one of the best games from that generation, Grand Theft Auto 4. Ah yes, the fourth Grand Theft Auto game, even though this is technically the 9th game if we're counting everything in this series. But yeah, this is going to be one of the biggest games for this marathon, and for good reason. When GTA 4 came out, it was probably the biggest game in the world at that point too. The game was a critical masterpiece, scoring in the high 90s on Metacritic, was nominated for and won several Game of the Year awards, and sold over 25 million copies before GTA 5 came out, which is just absolutely insane. And much like most of the other games in this marathon, I haven't played too much of this one. This is again another game where I would play at my friend's house where we goofed around with cheats on, but I didn't really play it in full for myself until this video. It was a game that I picked up pretty early on in my PC gaming days since, well, hey, I mean, how often do you see this thing go on sale for less than 10 bucks? It's seriously like every other month. So to the backlog it went. Until today, that is. Yep, GTA 4 has finally left that eternal purgatory, and I've played the game in full. So, what do I think of it? I won't beat around the bush with this one. GTA 4 is a great-ass video game, and one that I enjoyed for the most part. There are a couple things that were either bothersome or disappointing that did detract from my experience that I'll get into in a few minutes, but GTA 4 impressed me in far more ways than not, and easily sits among the very best that the franchise has to offer. It's a massive video game that has a lot to say and even more to do, and it's one that I had an incredibly fun time with. So with that all being said, we have a lot to discuss today. So without further ado, this is my review for Grand Theft Auto 4. So GTA 4 does a lot of things right. The PC performance isn't one of them. Yeah, I want to get what might be my absolute biggest gripe out of the way with this game, and that is the performance that I experienced during my initial playthrough. Now, from what I hear, these are issues mainly found on the PC port, so if you're experiencing these games on either the PlayStation or Xbox, it's safe to assume most of these won't be too much of a problem for you. I'm not that lucky. I encountered a number of problems throughout the game's 25-hour runtime, including character models stuttering during cutscenes, the camera zooming in very close in certain cutscenes, far past the point it should, and I mean way past the point it should. What is this shit? I had 7 hard crashes, with 4 of them taking place in this one mission alone. Whenever I would travel to the third and final island, I would also have about a third of the total frame rate that I would have anywhere else in the game. Whenever I would hit a traffic cone or get a phone call, the audio would get this weird feedback noise. I had button prompts that refused to leave the screen. And most frustratingly, during the final mission of the game, spoilers by the way, there's a point where you need to rapidly press A in order to get inside of a helicopter. The A button stopped working in this instance, causing me to reset 3 times. Not to mention, the PC version also doesn't have the online game modes accessible anymore without the use of a mod, so it has that going against it too. Suffice to say, I won't be covering that portion of the game for this review, but based on what I hear, it's more of a stripped down version of GTA 5's online, with less activities, but also less grindy and microtransaction bullshit. So maybe it's actually the better version, I don't know. With all that being said, the best way to play GTA 4 right now is by using community patches and mods to bring it up to snuff, or just play the console version with the inferior graphics. Dealer's choice. Gonna be honest with you guys though, I seriously had more trouble playing this game than I did any of the Definitive Edition trilogy. It's seriously not a good port. So while the performance was kind of on the shit side, how does the rest of the presentation hold up? Well, I would say it's overall good, but it still falls short in a couple of key areas, mainly the character models. Now at the time, these were pretty solid, but early games from that generation definitely haven't aged the best when it came to making realistic human models. Since the earlier GTA games had this kind of cartoonish quality to them, I think they hold up a little bit better, but since a lot of the stuff in this game is definitely on the more realistic side, it's starting to show its age as the years go on. The best thing in my opinion is actually how the NPCs will now ragdoll when they're falling, when they're shot, or when they're hit by a vehicle. This goes a long way into increasing both the brutality of the violence we're witnessing, but also the hilarity of seeing people fly through the air and thrash wildly before they land. All in all, graphically speaking, characters here mainly just look like a product of the time, which is okay, I can get over that. Speaking of a product of its time, let's talk about the usage of color.
Gray.
Yeah, the game is gray and brown and dirty feeling, just like pretty much every early 360 and PS3 game, but do you know what else lacks bright colors and isn't clean? Fucking New York! Yeah, I don't really get the criticism here. Like, sure, compared to Vice City or San Andreas, this game does look dull with its muted colors, but I mean, given the game's goal of realism, I think this sort of adds to the oppressive feeling that Liberty City is trying to portray. It also does make the times when the sun sets, or the areas that are supposed to be representations of Central Park and Times Square, pop out a little bit more. Which I'll get into that stuff a little bit more when I cover this game's map, because god damn do I love the open world in this game, let me tell you. I'll just say now that the open world in this game is extremely detailed and I have a lot of praise for it. Like, there are tons of textures and objects that will have their own unique placements in the game that you'll never see them again just because it makes everything feel more immersive. And that's insane for a game from 2008, when nearly everything was copy and pasted to save on memory space, so I respect this game for it and I love it. I also love the game's audio. Now, first and foremost, I've never really talked about the sound effects in this series yet, outside of the tire screeching and the farts from GTA 1. An assault on two senses. This game, however, really does a great job with its sound effects. The guns sound heavy and impactful, crashing into a car legitimately gives you a bit of guilt with the glass shattering and the metal on metal scrapes, and you can even hear car radios as you stand outside of running vehicles, which is awesome because sometimes it can really add to the ambiance. And then when it comes to the voice acting, this time around, I don't really have a laundry list of celebrity names to read off to you. I saved that for the music section of the game. This time around, it looks like GTA 4 actually has more of a lesser known cast. Like, if you scroll through the IMDb page, you'll find that a lot of the actors' most well-known role is probably GTA 4 itself. That or maybe a minor character from a movie, TV show, or another video game. Let me say, that does not detract from this game's performances at all. In fact, given the scope of different ethnic and cultural backgrounds this game has, I kind of like the idea of not having a dozen celebrity voices that I can try and identify in favor of just listening to what's being said. One minor detail I really appreciate too is that if you reattempt a mission, you can actually hear that there are a few different dialogue readings that offer slightly different variations to the conversations. Rockstar really didn't need to do that since the majority of people wouldn't experience that or even notice it if they did, but that type of attention to detail really goes a long way for me. Oh yeah, and the music in this game also unsurprisingly kicks ass. You've got modern hip-hop songs at the time from artists such as Nas, Mobb Deep, and Ghostface Killah. You've got some electro house pieces from Deadmau5, Justice, and Boys Noise. You've got some hardcore punk with bands such as the Cro-Mags, Agnostic Front, and Sick of It All. The classic rock stations that have tons of bangers from artists such as Queen, Genesis, and Thin Lizzy. You got the 80s station that plays all the songs that you thought should either be in Vice City or Vice City Stories, but were actually third-round draft picks. And that's not even getting into all the jazz, funk, reggae, modern rock, disco, down-tempo, Latin, or dancehall music they have. There's just a ton of shit here. It's a pretty good representation of all the big music scenes that people know about from New York. But I do have to say the hip-hop selection is a little on the disappointing side. I just feel like we're missing some really notable artists such as Jay-Z, Biggie, DMX, and while it's great we have a Ghostface Killah song, I really wish we had something from Wu-Tang too. Of course, the radio stations are as funny as ever, and honestly, probably my favorite that we've experienced in the series so far. Especially commercials for both the radio and the TV, as well as the talk shows that satirize conservative media, which honestly plays a big role in this game's story. Which, yeah, let's get into that. It's like the best part of this game. Grand Theft Auto 4 takes place in a new continuity, completely removed from all the events of the prior games. So even though this is the next numbered entry, you won't really be missing out on anything outside of some Easter eggs and references to the previous game's characters and stories. I will be talking a bit of spoilers here, so if you want to jump into the story blind, I definitely recommend skipping to the gameplay section of this video. In this game, you play as Niko Bellic, a former soldier from a war in Eastern Europe who still has regrets from his past with his platoon being betrayed by one of its own members, causing the group to be killed. Niko makes a living for himself doing some smuggling, but he is betrayed again and is held accountable for the actions of another, so so he seeks to escape Europe to start a new life somewhere else. Nico works aboard a cargo ship for some time, but after receiving numerous letters from his cousin Roman, who has been pursuing the American dream in Liberty City, Nico decides to move there. It kind of lines up for him too, because he has intel that has him believe that the person who betrayed his original unit may also be hiding out in America. Upon arriving at Liberty City and being greeted by Roman, he pretty much immediately finds out that Roman has been bullshitting him, given the dump of an apartment he finds himself staying in, and we begin our story there. From there on out, it's kind of just the same exact structure that we've done in every single GTA game up until this point. This is kind of a surprise to me because I always heard people talk about how great GTA 4's story was compared to all of the other games. But really, the events aren't too dissimilar to what you do in games like San Andreas or Vice City stories. You will still do odd jobs for a number of NPCs that don't really affect the overall plot too much. You will still have a villain that will occasionally pop in and twirl their mustache at you, and you will still take part in an underground criminal organization and have people use you for their own personal gain. So since we have such a similar plot structure, you guys are probably wondering, what makes this game's story so special in the first place? Well, what happens in front of us might be sort of the status quo for the series to this point. The way that this game uses these events to share with us its message is incredibly powerful. While the PS2 trilogy was a lot more bright and vibrant and was mostly about fun, GTA 4 has a much more oppressive atmosphere and tone to the setting and the story at large, and we see how it affects everyone living in Liberty City. And while the characters don't have the zany antics or tropes that we see in earlier games, they are representation of broader ideas and act as extensions of different personality traits for what I believe is single-handedly the best character the series has ever produced. Fuck it, let's talk about him real quick. I love Niko Bellic as a character. I think he is likable, charismatic, witty, funny when he needs to be, but also incredibly flawed. He's got a bad temper. He often gets himself into situations where he ends up regretting it, and most importantly, he doesn't let stuff go. Playing as an Eastern European in a fictionalized version of New York, you'd probably assume that this was going to be a massive fish out of water story. GTA 4 actually subverts that trope because almost immediately, Niko is finding his way, doing jobs, making connections with other characters, and is becoming rather successful for himself. Niko essentially takes on the survival of the fittest mentality immediately, and while there are a couple of cultural things that he doesn't fully grasp, it looks like he found another environment which he could thrive in. In some regards though, because Niko's checkered past has been filled with betrayal, violence, and an overall bleak outlook on the world, this still follows him even when he's halfway across the globe, and it still impacts every single one of his relationships. Now, the relationships that Niko has with the NPCs can really be divided into three camps: the optimists, the pessimists, and the corrupt. The optimists are characters that you would more or less expect to see in a typical GTA game since they're energetic, funny, and often the most memorable. These are the characters that Niko enjoys spending his time with, and they also do what they can to bring more positivity out of Niko, even when they know of his current or prior struggles. You have the Jamaican criminal Little Jacob, who spends most of his time smoking weed and who has an accent so thick that it's mostly played for laughs of how unintelligible it is. You have Brucey, who has so much I swear I love chicks bro energy that he's impossible to not pay attention to whenever he's on screen. And you have Bernie Crane, who's probably a little bit too much of a gay stereotype for a character in modern times, but I think he is mostly fun and actively provides an interesting contrast to Niko, since he was in the same unit that got betrayed, but he decided to take his life in a completely different direction. And of course, we also got to talk about Niko's cousin Roman. Roman is such a lovable dumbass and has so much charisma that you can't help but love the guy even when he's gambling all of your money away, cheating on his girlfriend, and calling you every other day to go bowling. No, I'm not interested right now, Roman. I'm literally inside of a helicopter. Please go away. He is such a flawed character, with him embellishing everything, being incredibly naive, and also being a complete coward, which is the exact opposite of Niko, so you can probably see why this dynamic starts to work. While Niko is kind of a downer to be around a lot of the time, he's also very successful in the work he finds himself doing, which is the exact opposite of Roman's situation, since he had to work his ass off to get the shitty apartment and small cab business he has now. Roman loves to party and really takes in everything about the American lifestyle, while Niko is a lot more focused on the task at hand and doesn't often wind down unless prompted. You can just imagine that these two butt heads frequently, and these are some of the strongest moments of the game, because you get to see two very different interpretations of life in America here. One of optimistic, unlimited possibilities, and one of cynical doubt, as no matter where on Earth you go, everything is truly the same. The next category of characters are the more pessimistic ones. Now, it should be kind of obvious that these characters aren't exactly bright or cheery and almost have no comedic relief to them. Instead, this group of characters relates to Nico on a personal level as he sympathizes with their struggles and actively looks to elevate them in a similar way to how some of his more positive friends do for him. These characters include Patrick, Gerald, and Derek McCreary, a group of criminals from the Irish mob that each deal with a number of issues such as drug addiction, incarceration, and the death of one of their brothers that is caused unknowingly by the hands of Nico. We also have John Gravalli, a bedridden leader of the largest mafia branch in Liberty City. We get an interesting point of view from him as a man going out preserving his name and his family's legacy, while also acknowledging the fact that he's essentially another spoke in the wheel that is causing this country so much trouble. Probably my favorite of these interactions are with Dwayne though, a former drug dealer who was recently released from prison. You can really tell this is a deeply personal relationship for Nico, as he actually tries to help reintegrate Dwayne back into society, with the success being mostly decided upon by the player's choice, especially when he has other characters that don't wish to see that happen. Which actually brings us to the final group, the Corrupt. Now these are characters that either operate as antagonists or as figures that Nico has to work with for a short period of time that are a bit more on the opportunistic side. You have characters like Francis McCreary, the last male sibling of the McCreary family, who is kind of similar to Tenpenny from San Andreas with the way that he's a corrupt member of the LCPD and uses criminals to sort out other criminals as he makes his way to becoming commissioner. Or you have the absolutely paranoid crime boss that is Jimmy Pecorino, who is so caught up with being the most powerful man in Liberty City, he doesn't see that his own actions of abuse and underhandedness are the very things that are killing his branch of the mafia. Then there is the United Liberty Paper Contact, someone who has a patriotic side and believes that he is ultimately doing the right thing by also using criminals to help take down potential threats to national security, but also recognizes that a lot of the time he is also doing stuff to appease the greed that is brought in by the American government. And I could just go on, but you guys get the point by now. This game does a phenomenal job with its characters and its writing. Yeah, we don't have a Scottish hair metal band, and we don't have a homeless psychopath that is bent on destruction, and we don't have Phil fucking Collins performing a concert for us. But what we do have is a cast that all play off each other in incredibly interesting ways in how they all relate to two of the game's biggest themes, the American dream and the desire for revenge. New York City has long been thought to be the capital of opportunity for people outside of the US, and was thought to be the center of where one could achieve the American dream. And we see the effects of that here. Liberty City, much like New York, is a melting pot for dozens of different cultures and ethnic backgrounds, and the characters from each of these different subcultures interpret and try to achieve the American dream in different ways. To some, it really is about living the lavish lifestyle. To others, it's about having power and notoriety. To some, it's about keeping those around you safe, and to others, it's about taking advantage of the situation that you're in to make sure you come out on top. You get a variety of perspectives here, which I absolutely adore. One of my absolute favorite lines in this game is between Nico and the United Liberty Paper Contact, where after an exchange where he essentially strong-arms Nico into doing some work for him, he says just like the old country to Nico in Serbian, which is his native tongue. Nico's response? Just like it. This shows that the idea of all the fluff that is around this idealized way of life is just bullshit. With the same game though, you also see people like Roman who has this unwavering optimism about them that do put the work in, and while Roman doesn't achieve much, he does ultimately start a business and a family, which is a lot more than what he had when he lived in Europe. This is a very nuanced take on the ideal, and I think it's done incredibly well in this game. Now the other primary theme in this game is revenge being mostly an unfulfilling venture. Nico's driving factor for him to go to Liberty City is to find the person who betrayed his military unit and deliver them justice. Along the way, he is actually given different choices to pursue that typically involve deciding the character's fate by either Nico or another NPC's desire to seek vengeance. Sometimes it'll be deciding if one particular character lives or dies, and other times it will be making a decision of who will survive between two characters. Now outside of the final decision, most of the choices you make in this game don't create massive story differences. And while you are given a choice in all of these instances, there is typically a message that rings true. Getting revenge on these characters often does not give any reward. If you kill a couple of the minor characters, you lose out on the possibility of encountering them later on for optional side quests, whereas your reward for killing them is just that. Instant gratification of killing another NPC with nothing much else other than that. And for some of the more major characters, there are even bigger repercussions. When given the choice between deciding who to kill between Dwayne and Playboy, as well as Derek and Francis McCreary, I think a lot of people will decide to spare Playboy and Derek, since it seems like it might be the most logical option since Nico had a longer relationship with Playboy, and he's also much closer with Derek. Something to consider though is that the game actually becomes a bit more interesting narrative-wise if you go the opposite route, since I think Nico showing his compassion to help Dwayne makes more sense, and the extra dynamic of having the awkwardness of Nico kill Derek adds another layer to his relationship with Kate and Patrick. It also helped that there's some gameplay bonuses for making these choices too, but I digress. These decisions all start coming to a head nearing the end of the game, where Nico finally gets his hands on the man who betrayed his military unit before the beginning of the game. When faced with the decision to finally enact his revenge, I ultimately chose to have Nico let him go, since it seemed like that was going to be the most pivotal choice in the story. And while making this choice does make Nico feel better, an even bigger choice reared his head when given the option of enacting his revenge on the main antagonist, Dmitry Raskolov. I think the option of working with Raskolov is better from a narrative perspective, but there is something that I do appreciate from the revenge choice too. If you decide to take the route that I took while seeking your revenge, you go and kill Raskolov before attending Mallory and Roman's wedding. At the wedding, Pegorino will pull up and attempt to assassinate Nico, but accidentally hits Kate in the crossfire. This causes Nico to hunt Pegorino down and enact his revenge one final time. Now I like how after killing Raskolov, you have this sense of security that gets interrupted during their wedding, but that's the only thing with this ending that I prefer if I'm being honest. Killing Raskolov in the beginning of the final stretch kind of makes the ending seem a little anticlimactic, since Pegorino is a fine enough villain, but since he's only really introduced during the last third of the game, he's not the most impactful. And speaking of not impactful, Kate being the one to be killed doesn't exactly carry that much emotional weight, especially because I took her on a total of like one date where I got smashed at a bar and drunkenly drove home, so I didn't really have that much of a connection with her. Now the other side, which I looked up on YouTube because I forgot to save before the final mission, has Nico try to work with Raskolov to make some extra cash, only for Raskolov to immediately betray Nico and have his goons attempt to kill him. This leaves Kate angry with Nico since she didn't want him to take the deal, and she skips out on Roman and Mallory's wedding because of it. At the wedding, Nico almost gets assassinated, but wrestles the gun out of the goon's hands. However, a stray bullet does hit Roman in the chest, killing him. The final mission sees Nico hunt Raskolov down, with Raskolov killing Pegorino before Nico finally enacts his revenge. I think it's pretty obvious why this is the better ending. Not only does Roman's death carry much more emotional weight than Kate's, but this ending also punctuates what an uncaring bastard Raskolov really is. Also, narratively speaking, I like the idea of Nico trying to let things go, and while it does begin to make him feel better, the very next time he does it, he loses the person that he probably cares about the most. This really punctuates the almost nihilistic tone the game sometimes has, and I absolutely love it. It's fucking great. Alright, you guys still with me? That was a lot of analysis. I expected to go into GTA 4's story and still have a pretty good time, but I did not expect to find this incredibly nuanced and multi-layered take on a concept like this. Some things I didn't even get fully into, like its commentary on conservative media or organized crime. But it does all of this in a way that's both entertaining and thought-provoking. The addition of the choice mechanic was great, and it fit the narrative super well in my opinion. I don't know what else to say other than I see why people consider this game to have the strongest story in the series now, and I'm glad I had a chance to experience it. I talked a lot of praise about Grand Theft Auto 4's story, but now I want to shift gears into something that I think might be a little bit more contentious, and that's unfortunately the gameplay. Now I'm not saying that GTA 4's gameplay is bad by any means. What I am saying is that it seems like for every 2 steps forward that GTA 4 makes from San Andreas, there's also one massive step back in some regard. I think the main reason for this is since GTA 4 took a much more realistic and serious approach to the story and world design, we also see that in the gameplay. And in some ways, it makes GTA 4 an even more immersive experience with some things that have so much attention to detail, we don't even see modern games doing them. In other ways, it almost feels like Rockstar committed too hard to the realism bit, and the game suffers in some areas for that. Let's start with some of the basic controls. So Nico has a much more weighty feel than any character that we've controlled in the series to this point. When you are walking down the stairs, Nico will slow down and look at his feet as he descends. If he gets bumped by a car, he will stumble and probably trip. Now while this might feel kind of clumsy in practice, I like this because it adds much more gravity to the environment and it requires a bit more thought for Nico's movements. Plus, seeing Nico get hit by a car and hurtle through the air will always get a laugh out of me. Most of the movement capabilities from San Andreas make their return here too, all except for the ability to swim underwater. Not sure why that was omitted, but hey, it is what it is. The combat has seen an almost total facelift. For starters, melee combat now almost turns into a stripped down version of Tekken when you enter it. It still fucking sucks. Yeah, you can block and parry and shit now, but I mean, just use a gun, come on. I also say this because I feel like we have finally gotten to a point where I can say that the gunplay is pretty damn good. There are still a couple of kinks, such as the auto aim being a little too touching when you want to switch to free aim, but everything else here is pretty damn solid. And even if they are a bit more limited in selection, I still think actually shooting them is far more fun. This is partly because of how enemies now react to certain parts of their bodies being hit, such as dropping to the ground when shot in the leg. The biggest addition to the gunplay is actually the cover mechanics though. This makes taking on multiple goons so much smoother. And while sometimes it can be a little janky to fire over cover, it's certainly better than nothing. There's even some minor environmental damage on some objects now too, which doesn't do much, but it does add to the chaos of gunfights in a way that I was able to appreciate. Now, if you do get shot and damaged in one of these gunfights, you'll still be able to find health packs in the more curated sections. Out in the open world, you're gonna have to find something to eat in order to heal. Nico seems to only be able to find hot dogs and hamburgers, so I'm assuming the cholesterol builds up and coagulates the blood or something. I don't know. Kind of funny to think about, but also kind of a pain in the ass because it isn't always easy to find a hot dog stand since they aren't marked in your map. And since that's your only option to heal, you can imagine that can sometimes get a little annoying. Thankfully, dying and getting arrested in this game no longer gets rid of all your weapons. So, fuck it, go crazy and do as much dumb shit as you want to. This really does add a lot to the enjoyment of the game, let me tell you. Now you can feel free to terrorize the public as much as you want, as long as you don't mind tangling with the police now and then. And let me be honest with you, the cops in this game do not fuck around. These guys are way more aggressive than anything we've seen before. Thankfully, you do have a little bit better of an option when it comes to outrunning the police. Now you could kind of shake off the police in earlier games by evading them for a while or hiding in a certain area, but it was almost always better to pick up the tokens or get your car resprayed. Now you actually have a circle on your minimap that will give you an active area the police are searching. While you remain in that circle, you will remain wanted, but by exiting the circle and remaining out of sight for a while, the police will eventually give up their search for you. If they do see you though, well, that circle is now placed right back on top of you and you gotta keep on running. I think this is a much better way of evading the cops, since instead of just mindlessly going in and out of spray and pays, now you actually have to be a little bit more tactical on how you want to drive away from the search. Speaking of, let's talk about the driving. Oh, here we go. So I wouldn't say the driving in this game is necessarily bad. In fact, when you really nail the handling of a vehicle down, it can be pretty damn rewarding. The only problem is that while they decided to take a much more realistic approach to the driving, it just simply isn't as fun as what we had in San Andreas. The handling of the vehicles is very heavy, meaning you take much wider turns than you would in any previous game. When you do try to take a sharp turn, the tires have very little traction, leaving you skidding way more than you think you probably should. And just don't even try to drift using the handbrake. The camera will spin all around, making that option basically impossible. All of these issues are especially bad in the beginning of the game, where all of the worst handling vehicles make their home. I definitely feel like it honestly needed a driving course like San Andreas did to better acquaint players with this new style of control, because I was completely out of it. And like I said, I get the goal here was realism, but when you say that and I also see the physics-defying moments of what happens when a car hits a bump and goes flying into the air, things start to not add up. And don't even get me started on the motorcycle controls. These are so touchy on anything that's not a straight road that you're better off just finding something else in most cases. Also, not to mention, there aren't really a crazy amount of vehicles to drive in this game either. Like, there are a lot of different cars and a few boat and motorcycle and helicopter options, sure, but you don't really get any more of the out there vehicles like we had in San Andreas. No planes, no military vehicles, no jetpacks, nothing. Not to mention, you also don't have the leveling system like San Andreas, so it's not like driving really gets any better, you just sort of get more used to it. Yeah, no leveling system or anything. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but I was kind of disappointed to not see it here. Especially with the game's dedication to realism and minor social sim aspects, I would have loved to see Nico having to manage his physical attributes, but I guess it just wasn't meant to be. Oh yeah, the social sim aspects. Let's get into that, since that is probably GTA 4's most controversial feature. So yeah, we all know about the constant phone calls that Nico will get from his friends and girlfriends asking him to do activities with them. Now these activities can range from playing pool, darts, and bowling, to going to a bar, restaurant, comedy show, or a strip club. These activities are all fine for the most part, a little jank when it comes to either pool or bowling, but still pretty decent. The main point of these is to keep NPC's affinity up so you can get some passive perks. This could be anything from fast travel to being able to call in some extra goons to help with gunfights, or having your wanted level clear. It's some pretty decent stuff, so it's at least worth considering. The only problem with this is you're kind of at the mercy of the game when these missions come up. If you don't feel like taking little Jacob to play pool or Brucey to the strip club, you are basically going to lose your affinity with them. Thankfully, if you are on a mission already, there's no penalty here. But if you're not and you want the perks that these guys provide, you're going to have to drop what you're doing and go do this. That's not even getting into how the girlfriends will request that you pick them up in certain vehicles or be dressed a certain way. Oh, and God forbid you get into a car accident or a shootout. Then the whole date is ruined suddenly. Psh. There's a way to kind of get around these meetings though if you agree to them and then immediately cancel them from your phone. Funny, but I wonder if they ever catch on after the 5th or 6th time that I've given them a rain check. You're able to cancel these through the usage of your cell phone. Yeah, this time around we actually have a protagonist that knows how to use technology. Nico can use his cell phones and computer at internet cafes for a variety of purposes. For the phone, he can call other NPCs that he can invite to go do activities with, or activate one of their abilities, or even advance the story in a few situations. There's also a planner in there that honestly gets pretty underutilized. You'll occasionally set up events for a specific day and time, but if you miss them, it just sort of reschedules them a little bit later with no real repercussions. Okay. You can also receive text messages from other people that are mainly mission specific or just used for flavor, and there's a camera too, which outside of like 3 missions basically sees no use. As for the internet cafes, this allows Nico to go on the web and do a couple of things such as check his email, order new themes for your phone, or go on to dating websites and experience what it's like to be male by swiping right on everyone, only for them to deny you. A Tinder simulator before Tinder even existed. It's great, you gotta love it. Most of the stuff on the computer is purely for flavor and world building, and there are some legitimately funny things on there, so I'd recommend giving it a run through. The weird thing for me is that there are some websites that show vehicles for sale, but outside of one story mission, you can't do anything here. Nope, you can't buy any of the cars from that website. Honestly, there is very little to buy in this game in general outside of clothes, food, hospital bills, police bribes, ammo, and weapons. Which is definitely a bummer since the property buy in all of the previous games was a pretty great way of using the extra funds in the late game, but now it just feels like you're just sitting on a fat wad of cash with nothing to do with it. I'm starting to get into the more nitpicky stuff, so I'll just cut off my general gameplay synopsis there. And it might sound like I'm being pretty critical of this game, and just let me reiterate. GTA 4 is still a decent game in this department. However, some of the earlier games just do things that I prefer in this case. Like, I still really appreciate the gunplay, and even the relationship social sim aspects I think are pretty fine here too, even if they are a bit on the intrusive side. So, I still think there's a lot to enjoy here, even if it wasn't my favorite in the series. Now for something a little bit more clear-cut and positive. I fucking love the open world in this game, man. It's honestly between this, Insomniac's recent Spider-Man games, and The Division for my absolute favorite representation of New York City in a video game. Now, I spoke pretty positively about the open worlds for all the PS2 games, especially when it came to San Andreas, but at the same time, those feel more like video game representation of real-world places rather than being the place itself. And don't get me wrong, there are pretty good representations, but Liberty City in GTA 4, it's just New York. The cramped city streets, the massively tall buildings, hell, all the landmarks that you can associate with New York, such as Times Square, Central Park, the Statue of Liberty, the Empire State Building, Little Italy, Chinatown, it's all here and it's a near perfect representation. I already talked about how I thought that the more monotone art style added to this feeling, but it's even further accented by the type of cars that people are driving, the clothes that people are wearing. Just the sheer amount of people you see anywhere you look is insane, and it 100% fits the vibe of New York City to a T. Navigating Liberty City is not as easy as picking a spot on the map and running in one direction. Much like driving in actual New York, you will have to learn the layout, know which roads to go down, and if you make a wrong turn, be ready to improvise and find a new route to your destination. There are often streets that lead nowhere, or ramps that will take you to places that you might not intend, so it feels like following the GPS on your minimap has never been more important. That being said, to those experienced with the city, you can still find plenty of shortcuts, stunt jumps, or places to hide if you're currently wanted. Unlike San Andreas, there are really no wide open areas either, with maybe the largest being the airport, which sees such little use that it basically doesn't matter. This means that traffic congestion and heavily populated foot traffic are common occurrences, making some main story missions or voyages over certain areas require extra care when proceeding. And I think this is fantastic. As I said, GTA 4 wants to have a feeling of having an oppressive atmosphere, and the unpredictable and claustrophobic nature of the city does a marvelous job of doing just that. Hell, I also think some of the more linear curated areas such as the museum, the bank, and the apartment buildings are pretty damn entertaining too. We also see the return of the segmented islands being broken off into 3 sections. or 4 if you want to count this one up here, but you get what I'm saying. Again, all these islands have their own identity to break up the areas enough that each island feels distinct from each other, but they also feel cohesive with one another. The one kind of sour spot for me with this is that there are toll booths on many of the bridges that honestly serve no real purpose other than either slow the player down or inconvenience them. It's another point that goes back to GTA 4's main gameplay issue. Is this mechanic realistic? Yeah. Is it fun? Not really, no. There's some more things I do appreciate about GTA 4's map, such as the more flexible travel system. So you can always catch a subway and let it take you to another station, but now you can also hail a cab or call Roman and have him send a car to your location that you can take to a destination. This is really convenient as it can take you to any pin on the map from optional activities, main objectives, or even a point on the map you pick for yourself. Though sometimes Roman is just straight up not available to send you a vehicle. Like, I know there's story reasons sometimes, but others there's just no explanation. That's about it for my complaints though, 2 very minor issues for what is just a stellar open world. And you know, I was a little worried when I saw GTA 4's map was smaller than San Andreas's, but because of the way that this game structures everything, it feels much bigger, you know? I kept this segment pretty brief because I don't really have too much to say, other than if you want the experience of driving around New York without having to pay ludicrous fees for parking or being sworn at by a dozen people wearing Timbs, your best bet is to probably play GTA 4. Last block before we wrap up this conversation, and we're talking about the mission design, and if I'm being honest with you guys, I don't really love the missions in this game either. I don't think there was a mission that I flat out hated or thought was bullshit or anything, but there also weren't very many that stood out to me either. There are some good ones, sure, like Museum Piece that has a big shootout in the museum, complete with a whale skeleton falling down, or 3 Leaf Clover, which is a bank heist that sees Nico and the McCreary brothers attempt to escape the police on foot in the middle of the city. That part's fucking cool. Everything else though, I say this as someone who has played through the entire game, nearly 90 missions, over 25 hours of gameplay, and I can really only remember about 5 to 10 missions tops. Everything is just pretty status quo here. You have a gunfight at this location, you have a car chase here, you have to go to this place to get a thing, that's kind of it. Not to say I was having a bad time since the shootouts were fun, and there was the rare mission here and there that had a section where Nico was doing something like a job interview or using the internet to set up a date, but those sections were really few and far between. And I know, once again, Grand Theft Auto 4 is supposed to be more realistic. I get that. I wasn't necessarily expecting to have Nico get a jetpack or to save Phil Collins' life again or anything, but most of what you do in these missions is exactly the same, and it becomes really hard to differentiate them from one another. Like, the level of effort for a lot of these missions was definitely improved. Many of them have cutscenes throughout to add to the drama, and some of them have objectives that change mid-mission, since these are generally longer than your average PS2 GTA mission. I don't know, man, when everything is roughly the same quality, and you are more or less doing the same activities every single time, it all becomes one big blur, which I didn't really feel for other GTA games, such as San Andreas. And I'm also not a big fan of how scripted some of these missions can be. So sometimes you'll be chasing down someone on foot or in a car in one of these missions, and you will not be able to properly kill them before they reach a predetermined destination. This isn't the worst thing in the world, but it's kind of weird when you pump an NPC full of bullets and not have them die, or have an AI rubber band ahead of me no matter how fast I move in a car. It just makes the stakes feel a lot more video gamey when you realize what's going on, and it's kind of lame because of it. What's also kind of lame is the real lack of reward for completing many of these missions. In the early game, they serve as tutorials to essentially get more unlockable things early on, but mostly everything gets unlocked as you progress in the story in general, as opposed to specific things for certain missions. We don't get a hangar to use or a jetpack to fly from particular missions. You just eventually advance through the story enough to maybe get a new safe house or a new weapon unlock here and there. Yeah, that's kind of how the mission flow works in a nutshell. It seems like you have to meet a quota of these NPC missions in order to unlock the next main story mission, but this time there may be around 3 to 5 to pick at any given time. I like that there's always an option available to you, but personally, I did just as many of one NPC's quests as I could at a time, just so I could keep their stories as cohesive as possible. There is, of course, also a ton of side content to do this time around. There are the standard things that you've seen in plenty of other GTA games at this point, like cab delivery, drug smuggling, vigilante missions, car races, stealing vehicles, You know the drill by now. There are some new additions like the assassination missions, which paints a particular NPC on the map for Nico to kill. The even better version of that is the most wanted missions, which sees Nico take control of a police car, hack into its computer, and take down some of the most dangerous criminals in Liberty City. Then there's the pigeons, which I shot one, saw that I needed 200 of these bastards to get everything, and I said fuck that. Finally, and most interestingly, is the random character encounters. These are essentially small scenarios that Nico might randomly encounter when traveling through the open world. They usually have very easy objectives, if anything at all, and are just there to add to the immersion a little bit. I again think these are fun, and they go a long way into making GTA 4 an even deeper experience, and it doesn't surprise me that Rockstar has continued to bring these back again and again. So we didn't quite hit the length of my San Andreas video, but we sure as shit covered a lot of stuff with this one today, so let's recap. I think Grand Theft Auto 4 is a great fucking video game. I had an awesome time playing it, and I think it's one of the best games I've covered in this marathon so far. There is a lot to love about GTA 4, such as the presentation being once again great, the open world of Vice City being the best the series has produced up to that point, and the gunplay has seen massive improvements all around. I love the story, and man, Nico as a character, I think Rockstar has a really tall order ahead of them if they ever hope to top him with a new lead in a Grand Theft Auto game. Rockstar succeeded in making GTA 4 the most realistic GTA game they could. However, I think that's a bit of a double-edged sword. This game, at many points, sacrifices the more fun option for something more realistic, and I can't say that every one of those decisions was the right call. I can't help but wonder if we were given the more arcadey control of vehicles, if that would have made navigating Liberty City even more fun. I can't help but think if maybe we had some more out there missions, people would remember this game even more fondly than they already do. If it sounds like I'm being really hard on this game, let me restate again. If I were ranking all the GTA games I played up until this point, this would probably be in second place, with the only competition maybe being Vice City, since I absolutely love the vibe of that game. I can easily recommend this to anyone who's ever had any interest in the series. Hell, this might actually be one of the best games to jump into if you want to avoid the shock of what some of the other games in the series feel like to play. Give it a try if you haven't before, preferably with the fan patches or the console version if you can. But some of my more experienced GTA 4 fans have probably noticed that I didn't mention anything about this game's two main expansions, The Lost and the Damned and The Ballad of Gay Tony. Well, I decided to actually split those off into a couple smaller videos for you guys since, hey, this video went on long enough, and I kind of like to pace myself a little bit with doing, one long video and then a couple shorter videos. It's a little bit better for work-life balance, I guess you could say, but, it is what it is. So, yeah, hoping you guys are looking forward to those videos, because they're going to be coming really soon. Other than that, that's all I got for you guys today, so thank you for watching. What was your favorite memory of Grand Theft Auto 4? Please be sure to leave your thoughts in the comment section down below, and hey, if you enjoyed today's video, maybe consider giving a like and subscribing. Thank you guys again, I'll catch you in the next video.